of that. Now, Diogenes becomes extremely famous throughout the Greek world to the point that Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, hears about him. And when he came to visit Greece, he learned that Diogenes was living in the city of Corinth. So the delegation of the notables of the city uh, comes to welcome Diogenes, I'm sorry, Alexander, and they say, Alexander, what would you like to see? We will take you anywhere in the city. And Diogenes says, I'm sorry, Alexander says, the first thing that I want to see is Diogenes. I want to meet this guy. I've heard so many things about him. So they look for him everywhere, and finally they find Diogenes in some corner or some bench in the middle of the day, lying down, just enjoying the sun. And this entourage of men following Alexander arrives, and Alexander is in front of him, and everyone is waiting to see what happens, and they poke at uh, Socrates. I'm sorry, at Diogenes, and he opens his eyes, looks up, and Alexander says, Diogenes, it's my pleasure to meet you. I have heard such amazing things about you, and I've always wanted to meet you, and this is one of the highlights of my life. Tell me, can I do anything for you? And Diogenes says, can you please move away because you're covering the sun? And of course, Alexander is delighted that he was basically insulted by Diogenes. And then he says, you know what? If I had not been Alexander, I would have loved to have been Diogenes. This episode shows that Diogenes has no respect for authority, for fame. He's not looking at some powerful man to be fond of him. But the answer of Alexander is also interesting because Alexander is the man who is about to become the greatest conqueror in history, a man who is carrying upon his shoulders these tremendous responsibilities. And what does he say? Oh my God, I wish I could be like Diogenes, a man without any cares. And that is because Diogenes has achieved something that becomes a very important concept in Greek philosophy, and that is the concept of uh, being able to be free of any disturbance of your mind. Diogenes is free because he doesn't believe in anything. And that's a very scary thing to do. And of course, Alexander wishes he could be like that, but of course, he will not be like that because even though we see it in Diogenes, we are not willing to take that step. Diogenes is an extreme. He's not only uh, living an extreme life, but he is uh, presenting an extreme philosophy, and that will have a profound influence. There's a story that he is captured by pirates and then he is sold in a market. So there's an auction of slaves, and this wealthy man comes in and bids for him, and he buys Diogenes. And when so he comes down from the auction block, and he tells the man who just bought him, uh, congratulations, you have just bought yourself a master. Uh, this man will employ Diogenes to teach his children, and Diogenes will live a pleasant life in that family until he dies. Diogenes is going to be the founder of this school of philosophers called the Cynics. Actually, it's a movement. And their stories, for example, there's a wealthy couple who decide to give away their fortune. They free their slaves and they become beggars, just like Diogenes. During the time of the Roman Empire, And when Christianity came around, the cynics were persecuted. And you can see why. The Roman Empire, an empire that wanted to impose the absolute authority of the state, you don't want people like Diogenes rejecting all the values of society, laughing at authority. Christianity, which becomes the dominant religion of the Roman Empire later in history, they don't want people to question the existence of God, the existence of moral values. So the cynics are very important, but they will be persecuted because of their beliefs. A school of philosophy that is linked uh, to the tradition of the Cynics is the Stoics. The Stoic school was founded by Zeno of Citium, and they're called Stoics because they used to meet at a place called the Stoa in Athens. It was actually a long hall with columns, uh, and since they always met there, they were called the Stoics. First thing that we need to know about them is that they were materialists. They believed in the atomic theory of Democritus. That is, that everything is made of atoms, and even humans were constituted by atoms, and when we die, we are no longer ourselves, but the atoms still persist as matter. But beyond matter, nothing exists. So, one of the basic tenets of the Stoics is that there is no afterlife, and therefore, what matters is not what we are or who we are, but what we do, our actions. The Stoics depart from the notion that um, emotions control us, and that never leads to good results. So, if we can have control over our emotions, our lives can be better. We can actually live a life of virtue. In order to be virtuous, we have to embrace reason. Rational behavior leads to a virtuous life. And if you look at your own lives, look at think of the moments when you have been in trouble. It has never been because you made the rational decision. Think for a second. Every time that you were in a difficult situation, it was because you allow your emotions to take control over you. So reason should be your guide. Now, in life, there are many situations that you don't control. What you can control is your reaction to those situations. And then you can control certain aspects of your own life. So, one of the aims of the Stoic philosopher, this Stoic wise man, was to develop something called apatheia. That's where our word apathy comes from. Apatheia means to be free from passions, meaning that you are able to suppress desires, because desires lead to more desires. Desires mean that the emotions take control over your body and your mind, and it leads to a situation where problems arise. When you have control over your emotions, when you have uh, apatheia towards emotional uh, emotional situations, then you can follow a life that is a life of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Temperance means moderation. Once you have this indifference towards emotions, you can then think clearly. You can then adopt the courage to act appropriately, and you will act on behalf of justice, and your decisions will never be extreme. You will act with moderation. If you follow this, if you are able to um, develop apatheia, then you can then attain the level of ataraxia. And ataraxia is a very interesting concept. It is not happiness, because the Stoics believe that happiness is an emotion. Happiness is something that you don't have control of. And actually, if you look at your own life, happiness is not a constant state. Happiness comes in small amounts, right? You're happy sometimes for little things, something you eat, someone you see. You can be happy at the important events in your life. when you graduate, when you get married, when your child is born. Uh, but happiness is a high, and that means that it cannot be sustained. And you may want to be happy, but you cannot force yourself to be happy. So you don't have control over that. So instead of happiness, the aim of life, according to the Stoics, is ataraxia. It's a state where you can see clearly. It's a state of serenity. It is a state when you are unaffected either by pain or by pleasure. And when that happens, you, ataraxia enables you to become one with the world and basically pay full attention and become engaged in the moment. When you have attained ataraxia, you see the value of every moment, you see the value of everything, you see the value in the small things in life. Ataraxia is a state that makes you aware of the moment in time. Of course, most humans want to be happy. And that's why, we want excitement in our lives, especially when you're young. People like to do extreme sports, or you want to travel around the world and see new places and exotic places. You want to meet people, right? You want to go to the club and dance and have fun with your friends and do something that is unusual. The problem with that attitude about life is that it cannot be sustained, and it can be disappointing. It leads to expecting too much of life, and the expectation of what something will be is greater than the actual thing. And that disappointment then leads to what? To some form of depression. Ataraxia is the philosophy that tells you the day when nothing happens is a good day. No drama. Today, I woke up, had a simple breakfast, drove to work, had an okay day at work, had a salad for lunch, went home, no traffic, took a shower, went to bed. Uneventful. That's a good day. However, it's not only about that, because it also means that today, during my lunchtime, I went out to the park and I saw that beautiful flower. And I enjoyed that flower. And I had a cold beer when there were 90 degrees. And that first sip, I was able to fully enjoy that. Ataraxia enables you to value every single minute that you live. It allows you to embrace the moment and to become one with that moment rather than be expecting something extraordinary. You see, the extraordinary is in the little things. And ataraxia is this sense of serenity that takes out the blindfolds and enables you to see the beauty in the small things in life because you're unaffected by expectations created by desire. You are unaffected by emotions. When you experience ataraxia, you have a vision that is clear and rational and harmonious with the universe. Another philosophy that is closely connected to this tradition is the philosophy of Epicurus. Epicurus, like the Stoics, was a materialist. He believed in the atomic theory. Everything is made of atoms. Matter is existence, and without matter, there's nothingness. So, for example, he said that people are unhappy because they are afraid, and the greatest fear is the fear of death. So he said, don't worry, because when you are alive, death is not around, and when death comes in, you're no longer around. So you can never be together with death. Basically, what he's trying to say is that death is inevitable, you cannot avoid it, but when it happens, You no longer exist. So what matters is what? What matters is what you do in life. So he believed that the aim of life is pleasure. And there are two types of pleasures. Well, actually, there's two modalities of pleasures, and then there are two kinds of pleasures. So there's the modalities of pleasures are the pleasures that give you something. For example, I used the example of an ice cream before, right? Well, it's a hot day, and you eat a nice strawberry ice cream. It gives you a sensation that is pleasurable, that it makes you feel good. When you're very tired, you have been working, your legs hurt, your back hurts, and you go home and you take a nice warm bath and then go to bed in a very warm bed. That's a pleasure that adds something to you. So there are the pleasures that add something. Uh, listen to music, for example. That would be another type of pleasure. Uh, reading a good book, and of course, physical pleasure. Then there are the pleasures that take away the pain. And he believes that those pleasures are very important because if you can just take pain away from your life, you can be a happy person. Now, within these two modalities, the pleasures that give you something and the pleasures that take pain away, there are the physical ones and then there are the mental ones. So, eating, drinking, sensual uh, uh, sensual experiences, all of those are physical pleasures. And he says, and they're great, they're good. The only problem with physical pleasure, however, is that the more you get of that, the more you want. And when you want more, it's no longer a pleasure. So you have to be very careful with physical pleasure. Physical pleasure has a place in your life, and it is important you have enough of that, but you cannot make that the aim of your life because then you will become a slave to pleasure. And that's not a good thing. Mental pleasures, on the other hand, the more you have, the higher your state of mind, the higher your happiness. So, for example, the pleasure of music, the pleasure of philosophy, the pleasure of learning, the pleasure of contemplation of nature, those are pleasures that just, the more you have, the better you become as a person. So, um, he distinguishes between two ideal states. One is called aponia, and aponia is the state where you have achieved the absence of physical pain. Uh, you're never hungry, you are comfortable, you have a house, you're never cold, you're healthy. That's aponia. And actually, some people think that Epicurus was the philosophy of gentlemen because in ancient times, most people had very, very difficult lives. The only people who could have aponia were people who were probably very wealthy landowners who had slaves who did everything for them, and they had the ability to eat well and to live in comfortable quarters and to have, you know, better health than their servants. So very often we see that members of the Roman nobility, for example, embrace the philosophy of Epicurus. But putting that aside, aponia is the absence of physical pain. And that's very important because if you have physical pain, it doesn't matter how wise you are, it doesn't matter how rational you want to be, that physical pain will dominate uh, everything in your life. Have you ever had a toothache, right? Doesn't matter how good your life is going on, if you have a toothache, that dominates everything. So aponia is very important, the absence of physical pain. But if you have aponia, then you can go to the next step, and that is ataraxia. Now, we already saw that concept among the um, Stoics. In the case of Epicurus, ataraxia is defined as the absence of mental pain. So if you remember for the Stoics, ataraxia was some sort of evenness of temperament and evenness of affect, when you are completely serene and nothing is affecting you in the way you think. In the case of Epicurus, ataraxia is the absence of mental pain, when you are not disturbed by any dark thoughts, when you don't have any worries, when you don't have any anxieties, when you don't have any anguish. That is ataraxia. And Epicurus was quite extreme in what he believed. He believed that if you cannot attain any of those things, maybe the best thing is to end your life. And of course, that is quite extreme. We don't know whether he actually meant that literally, or he was just trying to make a point to emphasize that a life without pleasure is not a life worth living. But it is interesting how the the two philosophies, the philosophy of the Stoics and the philosophy of the Epicureans, are very similar in their foundations, but they diverge, right? And in the case of the Stoics, the emphasis is in living a life of virtue by making rational decisions, by avoiding any type of emotions, by becoming indifferent to pain and pleasure. Whereas in the case of Epicurus, pleasure is the aim. You want pleasure in your life. And basically, you have towards that aim. And if that is not possible, then there's no point to existence. Now, this concept of ataraxia did not originate with the Stoics nor with Epicurus. It actually comes from another philosophy, and that philosophy is the philosophy of the skeptics. The founder of the skeptic school was Pyrrho of Elis. If you remember, the cynics didn't believe in anything. The cynic would say, there is no God, there's no justice, there's no perfect political system, there's no real beauty, there's no truth. Not believing in anything is a belief, right? So even someone like Diogenes believed in not believing in anything. The skeptics are different. The skeptics' approach to knowledge would be the following. They would not say that God doesn't exist. What they would say is, we don't know. They wouldn't say that true beauty or true justice or the perfect political system don't exist. What they would say is, we don't know if they do. And even if they did, we would not be able to know. To be a skeptic means to doubt. The skeptics thought that man is unable to know anything. So look at the question is, does God exist, or is there a God? How can you prove that God exists? You can't. You cannot trust your mind, you cannot trust your senses, you cannot trust what other people tell you. Even if something like a big light appears in the middle of your living room and talks to you and says, hello, I am God, how do you know that that's not a hallucination, that you're on the effects of some substance, that you are mentally ill? How do you know that that's not a fantasy, that is not a dream? You can't. So you either believe in God or you don't. But it's a matter of belief. It's not a matter of knowledge. We can believe in God, but we don't have the ability to know if there is a God. We can believe that something is beautiful, but look at how things change. If you can think that something is beautiful when you're 20 years old, and when you're 40, you look at that and say, how could I believe that that was beautiful? So which one is the correct one? When you were 20 or when you were 40? You may think that you love someone and you love that person more than anything in the world. And every single minute of your life is consumed by your love for that person. And 15 years down the road, you're divorced. and you hate that person and you meet someone else. And this is your true love, right? Well, is it? How do you know that this is the true love? How do you know that your true love was not the girlfriend you had or the boyfriend you had when you were 15 or the woman you married when you were 25 or the woman or the man that you will meet when you are 50? What is true love? We may think that we know what it is at the moment, but we don't really know. We don't have the ability to know. And the same thing goes for justice and beauty and any other uh, ideal concept. That is the tragedy of the human condition, that we cannot know. Now, how do you live your life if you don't know? Well, according to the skeptics, first you have to achieve a state known as epoche, which means the suspension of not of judgment. You make inquiries into the things that you want to know. And at one point, you come to the realization that you cannot tell the answer. What is beauty? You cannot know what is beauty. Is there a God? You cannot know if there is a God. Is there life after death? You can spend your whole life trying to figure that one out. But can you really know? So at one point, you just suspend judgment. You realize that you cannot know, that the human condition is the inability to know things. And once you have achieved epoche, once you have suspended judgment upon these issues, then you can attain a condition of ataraxia, which to the skeptics means the untroubled soul. And I put the words not caring with a question mark, because is that what they meant? Basically, you get to a point in life where really, should we care about this? Should I care about it? Uh, but it's not caring in the sense of indifference. It is just that you arrive to a position where you realize that it doesn't matter whether the answer to the question is one or the other. Whatever the answer to that question is, does it have an effect? And who knows? But because you cannot know, you cannot be troubled by it. And that is ataraxia. You are not troubled by the things that you cannot know. I think that a better way to understand the ideas of the skeptics is by looking at the works of a very famous writer whose name was Lucian of Samosata. Lucian of Samosata is one of the greatest writers of ancient times. He was born in what today is Syria, city of Samosata. He was a slave. Well, we don't know where he was born a slave or he was captured, but he was a slave. And Greek was not his native language, and yet he becomes such a master of that language. He's one of the most accomplished writers of ancient times. And he wrote dialogues. He wrote these little, they're not plays, they're dialogues where two or sometimes three characters who go back and forth. And basically it's fiction that follows the dialectic tradition of Socrates. And in his dialogues, he presents a view of life that basically embraces the philosophy of the skeptics. One of his most famous works is a short dialogue known as A Trip to Hades. According to the Greek belief, when people die, they go to the underworld and they cross a river and they live in a place called Hades. Hades is not hell. That the Greeks did not have a concept of heaven and hell. Hades is just a place where everyone lives. Everyone dies, and then they go there, and they live there for the rest of eternity. So in the story, the uh, the protagonist of the story is a fellow by the name of Menipus. Menipus was a cynic, and in ancient times, cynics kind of had a uniform. They all dressed like Diogenes. They wore a wolfskin. They walked barefoot. They had a little felt cap, and they carry a little stick with a bundle with a ball. And this character Menipus is walking down the street, and then someone says, "Hey, Menipus, come here." Yeah, yes. Hi, how you doing? Where have you been? Everyone was asking about you. And many people says, "Oh yeah, yeah. I was away for a while. I went on a trip," which is a ridiculous thing to begin with because all cynics are beggars. So what is this Menipus doing going away on some sort of trip or vacation, right? So the friend says, "So really, when you went away, where did you go?" And Menipus says, "I went to Hades." What? Yes, I went to Hades. I went to the underworld, and I spent a few days, and I just got back. And the friend says, "Why were you in Hades? Tell me." And Menipus starts his story. So he says that every day he spent in the agora, in the market, debating philosophers, because that's kind of the sport of the cynics, right? The cynics love to go to other philosophers and destroy their arguments. So Menipus says that he was at the agora, and he got tired of arguing with these philosophers. And he actually was kind of tired of being a cynic. He said, being a cynic is tough. And to be honest, he said, I wanted to know if there is a philosophy that is the right philosophy to live your life by. So rather than arguing with the philosophers at the Agora, he decided that he would go to the underworld, to Hades, and interview every great philosopher who ever lived. Thales of Miletus, Anaximander, uh, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all the great ones. And he would get the answer from that very philosopher. So he says that he went to the underworld and he crossed the river and he found the first philosopher. And for the next few days, he basically asked a series of questions of each philosopher. So in the dialogue, there's kind of a flashback where Menipus is talking to Socrates, Menipus is talking to all of these great philosophers, and he ridicules them. Lucian of Samosata was a great satirist. He had a great sense of humor. So he basically destroys every single philosopher, right? He makes fun of them. He ridicules their philosophies. And Menipus says that after a few days doing this, he is running out of philosophers. There's only one left. And the person left is a fellow who's blind. And this fellow is his last hope, right? So he goes to this philosopher and says, listen, my name is Menipus. I'm a cynic. I don't believe in anything, but I'm kind of tired of being a cynic. And I was hoping that coming to Hades, coming to the underworld, I would find a philosophy that I would live, that could live my life by. All of these philosophers are fools. What they say is nonsense, it's absurd. You're my last hope. Could you tell me what is the best way to live my life by? And the philosopher says, oh, Menipus, you know what? You should just embrace your laughter. That's it. Do not believe in what philosophers tell you, because all philosophers are liars. Go on your way. And Menipus uh, kind of, feels that this is the answer that he was looking for. This man, by the way, his name was Tiresias, and he was a character from the tragedy Oedipus. He's the one who can see clearly into the future. So Tiresias, who is a philosopher, tells Menipus to forget about philosophy. All philosophers are liars, and what he should do is just embrace his laughter. And this is the crucial point of the play, I'm sorry, of the dialogue. Because after this long quest, Menipus has arrived at an answer that he seems to be satisfied with. But then a moment of terror grasps him, because Tiresias is a philosopher. Tiresias tells him that all philosophers are liars. So why should he believe Tiresias? And basically, what the author of this dialogue is doing is playing with logic. In logic, there is something called a syllogism, where you have a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. If the major premise and the minor premises are valid, then the conclusion must be true. So the major premise in this mini dialogue is what? All philosophers are liars. The minor premise is Tiresias, the fellow who said that, is a philosopher. Therefore, Tiresias is lying. But if Tiresias is lying, then the phrase all philosophers are liars is wrong. But how can it? But if that's wrong, then Tiresias is not a liar. So as you can see, this is it's a vicious circle, because no matter how you put it, you cannot get out of that logically, right? And what Menipus, the character, discovers here is that throughout his life, the one thing that he could count on was language and logic. And basically, this is a commentary on all Greek philosophy, whether it was Thales of Miletus or Anaximander or the Sophists or Socrates or Epicurus or the Stoics or even the Cynics. What was the one thing that they all had in common? Their belief that language, that logic could take you to the truth. Even the Cynics relied on that. And now, in this little exchange that Menipus had with this philosopher Tiresias, he realizes that logic can play tricks on you, that language can play tricks on you. And if you don't have language, if you don't have the logos, if you don't have logic on your side, then what can you trust? What can you know? And the mood of the dialogue, which was very jovial, very funny, changes completely. And Menipus then tells his friend that he was completely depressed because he had hit a wall, a dead end. And then he says that as he is leaving Hades, he passes by a door that is only kind of half open, and he looks inside. And when he looks inside, he says, I saw a huge chamber where all of humanity was there. He calls it the crew of the dead. Every person who had ever lived and died was there. And there were a mass of humanity. You could not make out who was what. And then Menipus says, this is when it occurred to me what life is all about. You see, life is a play that something or someone puts together. And when you're born, the director of that play tells you you are going to play the king, and they tell someone else you're going to play the beggar. And you live your life as a king, and the other person lives his life as a beggar. And at one point in the middle of the play, the director says, you know what? Wait a second. I'm going to switch roles. And the king becomes the beggar, and the beggar becomes a king. And in the end, does it matter what role you play? No, because it's all a play. When he looked at that mass of humanity, he realized that it didn't matter whether you were a king, an emperor, a slave, a beggar, a man or a woman, a Persian or a Greek, a Spartan or an Athenian or an Egyptian. It was just a mass of humanity with no purpose. Everyone ended up in the same place. And that seems like a very, very disappointing view of life, right? And yet it isn't. Because what do you do when you realize that all the philosophical systems are absurd, that all ways of life are absurd, that whatever you do, one system, what set of values is not better than the other? What can you obtain from that? Freedom. Uncertainty brings you freedom. Can you imagine um, going, let's say that you own a house, you have some savings, you have your retirement account, and then you decide that you're going to sell it, everything, you're going to cash it in, and you're going to basically go to the bank and say, give me a big suitcase with $100 bills. You then take that suitcase, take a bus to the casino in Atlantic City. You go inside the first casino, you see there's the roulette table. You take out your suitcase with all the money that you have and tell the dealer everything on 26 red. Roll the roulette. And two things can happen. One is you hit 26 red and you're set for life. Or you don't. And you're homeless. You have nothing left. Which is the most probable of the two? The second one, of course, right? Your chances to hit 26 black or 20, whatever the number is that you chose, that those are quite slim. But that's what we do in life all the time. So from this perspective of the skeptics, when you choose a religion, when you choose a profession, when you choose a political party, when you choose a philosophy to live your life by, when you choose a partner in life, that's what you're doing. You're putting all your assets, you're betting everything on that one number in the roulette. Can you imagine? You are, you know, you're a Christian and you do everything that Christians are supposed to do. You go to church every Sunday and you follow all the commandments and you try to live your life the way that Jesus lived his life, and you do volunteer work. You're a good husband, you're a good son, you're a good father, you're a good neighbor, you're a good worker, you're a good citizen, you're kind, and you live all your life like that. And then you die, and then you see the light, a tunnel, and the light, and then when everything opens, you're hoping to see Jesus in heaven, and instead, who's there? I don't know, some Sumerian god or some Egyptian god. It's Isis or Osiris, and you go, oh God, wrong religion. I follow my whole life this, and turns out that I chose the wrong one. Or maybe you're a Muslim and you're a good Muslim and you follow every rule that Muslims have to follow, and you think that you will attain paradise following this, and then you die, and turns out that the true religion was actually the religion of the ancient people of Urartu, or the religion of the Hittites, right? And then what do you do at that point, right? It is almost as if you put all your bets on that one thing. So, does that mean that there is a right religion and a wrong religion? That there's one true faith and a wrong faith? That there is one true God and all the other gods are false, or there is no God at all? Or maybe all the gods are true? We don't know. And that's the human condition, right? That the inability to know. So what do you do when you face all of that uncertainty? Does that mean that you reject everything and you live like Diogenes? You just drop everything? No. From the perspective of the skeptics, you embrace uncertainty and you become free. That is, that if you're raised as a Catholic, you try to be a good Catholic. And in the back of your mind, there's the notion that even though you want to be a good Catholic, that may not be the only answer to being good. And that means that you can also read the Vedas, right, of the Hindu religion, and you can read the Quran, and you can read texts from Lao Tzu, and you're able to gather wisdom from other places. Or, if you're a Muslim, you say, you know what, I was raised in the Muslim faith, I will try to be as good a Muslim as I can, but that doesn't mean that I can, try to find wisdom in other religious traditions. It's not that you're going to convert to Buddhism, right? But why not read a Buddhist text? By doing that, that may make you a better Muslim. It may make you a better Christian. It may make you just a better person. You don't have to believe in anything and yet find wisdom in the Quran and in the Gospels and in the Tao Te Chi or any religious text. What uncertainty gives you is the freedom to look and explore the world. Life, and it's a cliche, right? Life is a long trip, and it is. And basically, as you go through this trip, you either can go with blinders or you can take those blinders off and just look at the whole world of possibilities that are out there. Maybe one is the correct one, maybe all of them are the correct one, or maybe none of them are the correct ones. But in the process, you will embrace freedom. And that is the message of the skeptics.